going to look at Federalist 55. This is part 1. Of course, the map in front of you is the yellow highlighted area is where the colonies were. And just want to remind you that when we are studying American history, the amount of land that would be available to the next generations is extremely influential in shaping of the American history. So just kind of keep that in mind. In Federalist 55, actually, it's interesting because Madison takes a very negative view of human nature and human beings, and at the same time turns around and gives human beings, at least some of them, great credit for being virtuous citizens and people that will be great leaders for the country. They will put country above and beyond anything else. And just let me read those relevant lines to you. It says, in all very numerous assemblies of whatever characters composed, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Had every Athenian citizen been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly would still have been a mob. Because this paper looks at all the criticisms that were leveled at the Constitution because they had only they would assign 65 seats to the first Congress, 65 seats for the members of the House of Representatives to the first Congress. And all the anti-federalists were saying, this is not the right number. This number is too few for so many people in America. And Madison says, well, if we increase the number to whatever you decide you want it to be, and if even every one of those citizens become almost like a Socrates, if they're going to get together inside an assembly and decide, it'll be just like a mob. So Madison does not agree with that. And the paragraph that he echoes the good side of the humanity would be towards the end of this paper, in the very last paragraph, as there is a degree of depravity in mankind which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify a certain portion of esteem and confidence. So Madison is saying, yes, for the most part, we should not trust human beings, especially with power, but there are a small percentage that when elected to represent their people will be virtuous. I'll start reading it from paragraph 1. The number of which the House of Representatives is to consist forms another and a very interesting point of view under which this branch of the federal legislature may be contemplated. Scarce any article, indeed, in the whole Constitution seems to be rendered more worthy of attention by the weight of character and the apparent force of argument with which it has been assailed. The charges exhibited against it are, first, that so small a number of representatives will be an unsafe depository of the public interests. Second, that they will not possess a proper knowledge of the local circumstances of their numerous constituents. Third, that they will be taken from that class of citizens which will sympathize least with the feelings of the mass of the people and be most likely to aim at a permanent elevation of the few on the depression of the many. Fourth, that defective as the number will be in the first instance, it will be more and more disproportionate by the increase of the people and the obstacles which will prevent a corresponding increase of the representatives. So he says, anti-federalists have been attacking us because they say 65 representatives will not be enough. And he says there are four distinct categories that these criticisms and attacks are in. And here in this and the next few papers, he's going to be answering these charges. And as we shall see here in a little bit, this will be answering the first charge that Anti-Federalists had made against him. So I'll continue with reading the next paragraph. In general, it may be remarked on this subject that no political problem is less susceptible of a precise solution than that which relates to the number most convenient for a representative legislature. Nor is there any point on which the policy of several states is more at variance, whether we compare their legislative assemblies directly with each other or consider the proportions which they respectively bear to the number of their constituents. So he says, it's very easy. Let's look at the state legislatures. See how many representatives they have in their lower house and the upper house. They are so different from one another. And he's going to give us some examples. Passing over the difference between the smallest and the largest states, as Delaware, whose most numerous branch consists of 21 representatives, and Massachusetts, where it amounts to between 300 and 400. A very considerable difference is observable among states nearly equal in population. The number of representatives in Pennsylvania is not more than 1/5 of that in the state last mentioned. New York, whose population is to that of South Carolina as 6-5, has little more than 1/3 of the numbers of the representatives. As great a disparity prevails between the state of Georgia and Delaware or Rhode Island, let me read that line again. As great a disparity prevails between the states of Georgia and Delaware or Rhode Island. In Pennsylvania, the representatives do not bear a greater proportion to their constituents than of 1 for every 4,000 or 5,000. In Rhode Island, they bear a proportion of at least 1 for every 1,000. And according to the Constitution of Georgia, the proportion may be carried to 1 to every 10 electors, and must unavoidably far exceed the proportion in any of the other states. So as you can see, he says, look, every state is different, and the way we see it, regardless of the numbers they do, we don't really see the number of their legislators really make that big of a difference in how the state governments do. So for those of you who are criticizing us for having assigned 65 representatives to the first Congress, members of the House of Representatives, to the U.S. House of Representatives, see, it says you're not looking at the big picture. Look at what's happening in different states and prove that instead of having 65, if we had 150 at first, they would do a better job. So as we go forward, he's going to be talking about these, and it's pretty straightforward